It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I am Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. The year is 1980, and after 6 seasons as the Doctor, Tom Baker is not just the longest-serving actor in the lead role, having already lasting a season longer than his predecessor, Jon Pertwee, but he's also the face of the entire franchise and world-renowned for the popular BBC series Doctor Who. However, things are going to get a tad rocky for Baker and crew. The show would get a brand new producer and showrunner. This new producer was young and had lots of big ideas and was poised to lead the series into a new decade with a much more modern look and feel. John Nathan Turner would be the longest running and final producer of the classic era of Doctor Who. And he was the guy in charge. This didn't sit well with Tom Baker, who had enjoyed having a lot of power over his 6 years playing the Time Lord. But Turner was a fan of the series, having grown up watching the show on the BBC. He liked the idea of making the show a little more mature to match his sensibilities and, yes, modernizing the show's feel. The monsters of the week were great, but they weren't always that scary for the older viewers. Why not add some real stakes to those baddies? The noticeable changes to this 18th season would be the new synthesized and very textured theme song adaptation. Next, instead of the more fluid lines or the time tunnel look of the opening credits as seen previously, it would be a star field full of more exciting flashing brights and special effects and so forth. Finally, even the Doctor himself would have a sort of a new look, having Baker dressed in burgundy and extending his already long scarf to an absurd length. Gone was his more vagabond look and more of a polished look, complete with something that every Doctor for the rest of the classic series would possess, an undershirt with the on-the-nose question marks on the collars. Baker wasn't a fan of many of these changes. In addition, as the years went on, critics of the show would be especially upset with Turner's desire to make the series far more brutal and mature than the earlier years. It would basically begin the long, slow death of this classic era. But this 18th season is an interesting one. I find all these serials to be incredibly watchable despite some of the problems present. The season began with the Doctor and his companions, Romana, a member of the Doctor's race, and K9, a robotic dog, going about their regular business. However, at the start of the 3rd serial of the season, Full Circle, Romana is recalled to Gallifrey, where she and the Doctor are both from. And before she could be taken home, the TARDIS passes through the strange phenomenon in space and wound up in an alternate universe called E-Space. And E-Space is green, whereas in space, I always took that as meaning normal space, is black. But anyway, in that serial, a new companion sort of joins the TARDIS crew, a stellar math student and stowaway, Adric. The second serial of the season is our focus for today, State of Decay. This serial is still in E-Space as the Doctor and crew try to figure out a way to get back to in-space. This is the middle chapter of what's really kind of colloquially known as the E-Space trilogy of stories. Interestingly, it's a concept that has never really been revisited in Doctor Who since. But I mentioned an elephant in the room, Adric. So let's talk about the young chap played by Matthew Waterhouse. Waterhouse was only about 19 years old when he joined the crew. He and Tom Baker really didn't get along. Baker thought the kid couldn't really act and he should have played the part as a mute. Interestingly, Waterhouse has not done a great deal of acting before or since Doctor Who. He does participate in the Big Finish audio dramas done for Doctor Who, but that's really about it. However, it's not the acting that makes Adric that elephant in the room that I mentioned. No, he's often cited as one of the least favorite Doctor Who companions ever. He's precocious, and his brilliant mind often causes him to come off abrasive or arrogant. And that's not something any of the Doctor's companions should ever be. Funny enough, that's exactly what the Doctor can be, but it shouldn't be something in the companion's bag of tricks, if you will. So I get why people have a great deal of disdain for him, but I actually don't find the character to be all that bad. In fact, he would ultimately die in the 19th season episode Earthshock, being forced to stay aboard a doomed spaceship to try to lessen the damage the ship would cause by crashing into prehistoric Earth. We'll probably talk about that episode someday down the line, because it was also the stunning return of the Cybermen, and the episode that I think basically inspired Stephen Moffat 25 years later to totally blow up and kill and ruin companions on an almost psychopathic rate. Now, what makes this story really interesting is the monster at play here and the surprising connection these creatures have with the lore of the Time Lords and such. So, let's dissect this and get into the meat of State of Decay. The serial opens with a trio of lords on this planet that has this feudal system. These lords are Zargo, Camilla, and Alcon. These three say the Great One needs servants full of life, so their servants must select among the peasants wisely. These servants or guards take stock of the young, strong, and healthy of the village to take them back to the Great Tower. In the TARDIS, the Doctor and Romana are looking for another planet in E-space. K9 tells them of a planet that's similar to Earth, and they land and the Doctor and Romana explore. A native is kind of scared of the two travelers when they pass him by, but they go to the village and they are treated like lords like those in the tower. When a local named Ivo says the lords in the tower protect the people from the wasting, the Doctor perks up. He wants to know about how long these lords and protectors have been on this planet, but Ivo won't give him any additional info. Ivo does tell someone else in secret about the strangers asking for scientists. Inside the TARDIS, Adric makes himself known, and K9 wants Adric to stay on board the TARDIS, but Adric logically debates that he being a stowaway, he doesn't actually belong inside the TARDIS at all. So that makes K9 agreeable to let him out and let him explore the planet as well. The two Gallifreyans are cornered by hooded figures in the forest, and these are the rebels. They are taken to a hideout where there is some technology that is not like what was in the village. In the tower, the lead guard of the trio of lords, Habris, tells Zargo and Camilla about the strangers. Alcon decides to take up the search himself to find these people that the guard has notified them about. And the rebels tell Romana that things have been like this for 1,000 years, but they plan to overthrow the lords, and the Doctor thinks that, well, maybe this might be a dangerous thing because of their protection from the wasting will be lost. He's hoping to coax information out of them, but they still won't say what the wasting is. It's almost as if they don't even know. A couple take Adric in for the night because it would be too dangerous to be out as it grows dark. Now, the Doctor learns from the rebels that education and technology is forbidden by the Lords. These people toil in the fields for the Lords, and some are chosen for quote-unquote selection, where supposedly the lucky few are sent to the tower to serve the Lords. However, some believe that's not the case at all. The Doctor and Romana learn about an Earth ship called the Hydrax. One of the rebels recognizes the crew of this ship as the three lords that live in the tower. After leaving, it starts getting dark pretty fast, and bats swoop in and start to attack the Doctor and Romana, one of the bats actually biting the Doctor. Soon, guards arrive to take the Doctor and Romana to the tower, and the Doctor immediately spots that there are no windows in the throne room. He and Romana are a little put off by the eerie presence of Zargo and Camilla, similar to the Dracula tale. Camilla and Zargo offer them food, but it's raw meat and it's blood instead of wine. So a little bit of a twist on the Dracula thing. But Camilla even reacts similarly to our Earthbound count when Romana cuts her finger. A sudden second inspection by Alcon himself in the village gets Adric captured by this counselor of the lords. But meanwhile, the Doctor and Romana puzzle out that the planet is in a state of decay in terms of technological advancement. Romana even says that there is some sort of pressure to keep society from advancing. Zargo mentions that it's pretty impossible for them to be the oppressors, as a quote-unquote ship of state requires commanders. The two Time Lords figure out that their tower is actually the Hydrax itself, and the same names of the crew has been passed down for generations, which results in their current names as they are pronounced. Alcon has placed Adric in a trance and has brought him to the tower and has named him to be the first of the so-called chosen ones. Zargo and Camilla tell Alcon that they want the Doctor and Adric to be killed because they think these two are dangerous. However, Alcon convinces the Lord and Lady that Adric is too young to feed the Great One, and it won't matter where he's from once they initiate him, because they can make him into whatever they want. The Doctor and Romana are able to slip their captivity and get to the control room of the Hydrax, and they hear a throbbing sound that the Doctor has a sneaking suspicion of what it could be, but he doesn't even want to think about that possibility. They soon find a collection of what looks like mummified bodies that have been drained of their blood and life force. The sound is the heartbeat of a large creature, and the bodies they found had their blood drained into the fuel tanks of the Hydrax and tubes sending that blood to this unknown or unseen creature. The Doctor says every planet has vampire legends, and meanwhile, Alcon finds them and offers them power, and he tells the Doctor and Romana that they were guided to this planet. What guided them there fed from the crew and made them into what they are, and this thing will soon arise again, to which the Doctor makes the connection that the Lords aren't descendants of the original crew, but the actual crew itself. The Great One tells Alcon that the Doctor and Romana will be sacrificed to him. Now, while in captivity, the Doctor tells Romana about an old hermit on Gallifrey that would tell him old ghost stories, and one of which was about the great vampires and how a single one of the vampires could suck the life out of an entire planet. The Time Lords hunted down all these vampires and seemingly got them all, but apparently one somehow escaped to E-space. Once they are saved by one of the rebels, Romana goes to look for Adric, and the Doctor returns to the TARDIS to find out about the war between the Time Lords and the great vampires. The one they are dealing with was the king of these vampires, and he learns that a large steel bolt sent through the heart of the great vampire can kill it, and that is the only way to kill these vampires. While Romana does find Adric, she is captured ultimately by Zargo and Camilla. So Adric is prepared to become one of the vampires, and Romana is prepared to be sacrificed to the Great One. The Doctor and the rebels are planning their attack on the tower, and most importantly, the great vampire. As the ceremony gets underway, the rebels attack, and as the rebels deal with the guards, the Doctor programs one of the Hydrax's scout ships to basically fly straight up into the air and fall straight back down to the planet and drive itself into the heart of the Great One to kill it. And when that dies, Alcon, Camilla, and Zargo rapidly age and crumble to dust. The Doctor hopes that with the vampire lords gone, the planet will return to its original path to become technologically advanced. So let's get to those three things that I like about State of Decay. First up, I have to give this the same like I always base my love of the serial The Demons that I covered earlier this year. And there's a real kind of gothic or folklorish feel to this story. Whereas Tom Baker typically had more sci-fi aliens or robot types of stories, this one stands out kind of like his Horror of Fang Rock and The Talons of Wang Chiang serials, there's still this sci-fi slant to it, of course, but it's mixed with something slightly different. In this case, it's the gothic horror of a trio of vampires that conduct themselves in a royal lord and ladyship sort of way. A lot of the appreciation I have for the serial is due to the writer Terrance Dicks. This was originally submitted for an earlier season, but it was postponed due to the BBC releasing a version of Bram Stoker's Dracula around the same time that this episode would have aired. To avoid the confusion, they just held it off for later. Dicks was an assistant script editor in 1968, but soon became the head script editor. He had a great relationship with Barry Letts, who produced all 5 seasons of Jon Pertwee's run, and selected Tom Baker to take over before he left the series. He served as executive producer for this final season in Baker's era as a sort of nanny to John Nathan Turner, since the younger producer had never run a show before. But there may be no more influential or knowledgeable person on Doctor Who than Terrance Dicks. He oversaw a massive amounts of and aspects of the series that still exist to this day, part of the deepest folklore of Doctor Who. He also personally wrote 67 of the novelizations of the Doctor Who serials that were released by Target Books. These were huge when I was a kid. I would go to the bookstore all the time and get these Target book novelizations, especially of the stories that weren't as easily able to be seen. But once that run of books was over, Dicks went on to write several of the new books for Virgin Publishing. And in 1994, he even wrote a book called Blood Harvest, which was another story that dealt with similar vampires to these seen in this serial. So I have to give this first to Dicks just for his length of service in the universe of Doctor Who, and just how much he personally shaped the best known and longest running concepts in the franchise. Second, speaking of story, I love the idea of how this planet and these characters and how they evolved here. It's like something out of an old Star Trek episode. A ship arrives and something, be it the technology of the ship or the inhabitants of the ship, create a new civilization. Then the world is made into this simplistic feudal society with backwards rules and traditions. Then, as the civilization ages, the technology fades into religion or folklore. It's a great melding of sci-fi and supernatural, and I'm always up for stuff like this. And thirdly, I love the relationship between Tom Baker and Lalla Ward, who plays Romana. At the time, the duo were a couple and would marry in the real world around the time this serial wrapped up. While the marriage only lasted about 2 years, they didn't end things on a super bad note. There were rumors that Ward always disliked. She still speaks rather fondly of Baker. She was great friends with Douglas Adams, who wrote a couple of Doctor Who serials himself and was the creator of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. He introduced her to his friend and noted atheist and evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins, and they would get married and be married for 24 years before splitting. Interestingly, Lalla's great-grandmother, Mary, was the first person to ever be recorded as dying in a motor vehicle accident. But anyway, back to Ward and Baker's on-screen chemistry as Romana and the Doctor is just simply fantastic. I feel like people don't realize how great of a character Romana was. She was always one of my favorite companions of the series. She's just overshadowed by the earlier companion Sarah Jane, who was one of the companions in the Genesis of the Daleks serial I covered previously on this show. But Baker and Ward acted off each other in a way that almost feels unscripted. At least that's how it felt. They have a natural rapport with each other, and it lightens the mood of every story they were in together. That's one of the great things about the Tom Baker era. The entire universe could be at stake, and Baker would say something glib or offhanded that would just make you laugh. He was never not in complete control of every situation, so he could make a joke for us watching. And add to that somebody like Lala Ward, who is also incredible as Romana, a character herself just as intelligent as the Doctor, and you've just got this great on-screen duo. Well, that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast each Wednesday and Monster Mondays on Monday afternoons at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new articles every Friday morning. After this episode returning to Doctor Who and a whole month of silent spooks back in October, it's time for a different kind of classic. Let's do that different kind of classic next time and take a look at the 1957 Ray Harryhausen created monster effects flick 20 Million Miles to Earth. Until next week, stay spooky.